In 2018, a man in India experienced a nosebleed that just wouldn't stop. He visited several hospitals and was given multiple blood transfusions, but nothing helped. But then he heard about an old folk remedy. A local healer prepared a mixture of 13 different herbs and spices, including turmeric, ginger, and black pepper, and amazingly it worked. The medicine stopped his nosebleed and saved his life. Now, if we set aside how terrifying this story is, there's something else that's really interesting here. How did people know that this particular recipe would stop bleeding? Well, it was probably a combination of trial and error and anecdotal evidence passed down through generations. But ultimately, this is not a good way to find a cure for diseases. After all, there are lots of medical practices out there that are based on folklore rather than science. And some of them can actually be harmful. So how do we get from unverified home remedies to modern pharmaceuticals? How do we know which medicines work and why? Hi, I'm here and this is Minute Earth. The answer starts with noticing patterns. In ancient times, people started to notice that certain plants had certain effects on the body. For example, willow bark seemed to reduce fever and pain, foxglove leaves could help with irregular heartbeats, and opium poppies made people feel sleepy. Now people didn't necessarily understand the chemical reasons behind these effects, but through trial and error, they figured out the right dose and how to prepare these plants to get the desired effect. These early medicines weren't perfect, but they were a start. For example, even though opium does make you sleepy, too much of it will make you dangerously slow and even stop your breathing. But by carefully adjusting the dose, people learned how to use it to treat conditions like diarrhea or painful periods. Similarly, while the foxglove plant can regulate heartbeats, eating too much of it can cause vomiting and diarrhea. So people learned which parts of the plant to use and how to prepare it to avoid these side effects. And as long as humans have been using medicines, we've also been trying to figure out why they work. Some of the earliest written records of pharmacology come from a Chinese book called Shenong Ben Chao Jing, or The Divine Husbandman's Materia Medica, which was written around the year 100 CE. It contains descriptions of over 360 plants and minerals and their medicinal uses. But it doesn't just list what can be used to treat what, it also explains how to identify the plants and the correct doses to use. And some of the explanations are surprisingly astute. For instance, it describes how a plant that grows in moist, shady places will have more medicinal power than one that grows in dry, sunny places. This is actually correct. For many plants, the concentration of active ingredients varies depending on where and how they grow. So plants grown in moist, shady places do tend to have higher concentrations of active ingredients than those grown elsewhere. But it took until the 19th century for Western scientists to start thinking about how plants might affect the human body in different ways. By experimenting on themselves, they started to map out the effects of plants and chemicals on the body. One notable example is a British physiologist named Henry Hallett Dale. In 1906, he published a paper describing the effects of a compound called histamine on the circulatory system. Histamine makes blood vessels dilate, which can lead to low blood pressure. He also noticed that a compound found in the Peruvian bark extract used to treat malaria seems to counteract the effects of histamine. This observation would eventually lead to the development of the first antihistamines. What Dale and others did in the early 1900s is basically the same as what scientists do today when they test new drugs. They give the drug to healthy volunteers and monitor its effects, then try to figure out how those effects might be useful for treating diseases. But testing drugs on healthy people has some major limitations. First, it's not always easy to figure out what a drug will do to someone who is sick. Like maybe it won't work on them at all. Second, it can be hard to tell if the drug is causing the effects you see because, and this is really important, correlation does not equal causation. Just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean that one is causing the other. To illustrate this, let's go back to the ancient Chinese. In addition to recording the effects of medicines, they also recorded the symptoms people experienced. And they noticed that some symptoms tended to appear together. For instance, they observed that sweating often happened along with an upset stomach, but they didn't know why. Later, scientists would figure out that sweating and an upset stomach are both caused by a rise in body temperature. So although the Chinese didn't understand the underlying causes of these symptoms, they still grouped them together. And this type of observation led them to develop a theory of disease that became the foundation of modern medicine. You see, the Chinese and other ancient cultures didn't have microscopes to see viruses and bacteria, so they developed other ways of understanding how diseases spread. The Chinese, Indians, Greeks, and others proposed theories of disease based on the balance of different substances in the body, like hot and cold, wet and dry, or even 4 different humors. Each theory proposed a different way of diagnosing and treating diseases. According to the Greek theory of the 4 humors, for instance, a person is healthiest when they have the right balance of blood, phlegm, black and yellow bile. To restore balance, treatments included leeching, where you remove some of each humor by, leaching, meaning letting blood out of the body. Nowadays, we know that balancing these 4 substances doesn't cure disease, but this way of thinking did get us thinking about the human body as a system in balance, and that has stuck around in Western medicine until today. Today, instead of thinking in terms of humors, we think in terms of physiology and chemistry. We've gotten much better at figuring out what works and why. Randomized controlled trials are considered the gold standard for figuring out whether a treatment works and whether it's causing any side effects. These studies compare a group of people who receive the treatment to a control group that does none, and they make sure that as many variables as possible are the same between the groups. If the treatment group gets better faster than the control group, then it gives us evidence that the treatment actually worked. But while randomized controlled trials are great at answering the question, does this work? They don't always give us insight into why something works. And figuring out the mechanisms behind a drug's effects is super important for several reasons. For one thing, knowing the mechanism helps researchers improve a drug. Sometimes it's possible to tweak a drug's chemical structure to make it more effective or less likely to cause side effects. For instance, chemists can sometimes make slight changes to a drug's molecular shape to make it bind more effectively to its target or to avoid binding to other molecules that can cause side effects. Secondly, knowing a drug's mechanism lets us know who it will work for and who it won't. For instance, some patients might respond better to one drug over another because of differences in their genetics. But if we don't know how the drugs work, we can't know whether those differences will affect their effectiveness. In the case of the herb mixture that stopped the Indian man's bleeding, we don't know exactly which compounds in the mixture did the work or how they did it, and that makes it hard to say whether it would work for other people. That said, there are now clinical trials underway to test whether a purified version of this medicine can stop bleeding after childbirth. As we learn more about human physiology, we can refine our understanding of what works, why it works, and who it works for. And who knows? Maybe someday we'll be able to design drugs that fit our bodies perfectly. Speaking of designing, we have a little bit of an exciting announcement to share. Thanks for watching this episode, which was brought to you with the help of our patrons. If you'd like to help support the channel and all of the fun stuff that comes with it, like blooper reels, visit our page or click the join button in this video.